$70 million, $50 million, $100 million. Taxpayers just don't roll over and say, oh yeah, do it. No, not at all. There's a process, a long, drawn-out process. First off, you have to know that you need a school about 20 years before you need the school. And you should know that, right? You know your demographics, you know how many kids you have now, you know how many kids you'll have next year, how many kids you'll have in 5 years, how many kids you'll have in 20 years, you know this, okay? Now, number could be off 5–10%, but you know, you're keeping track of this stuff, right? It's what you do, right? You know that you built the high school that they're in now, and then you know the capacity of that high school, and you know how long it will probably last. You also know how well you've been maintaining it. You have a replacement schedule for that school. And it is not a good idea to tell taxpayers the year before you plan to break ground that you want money for the new school. You gotta warm them up to it. So every year you give a presentation that's in public session that says, the long-term facilities forecast is this. We're still on track to start the planning process for the new high school, in 2 years, in 1 year. This is the year we start the planning process. At Cape and Open, I'll walk you through how we did that at Cape, okay? 5 years before we broke ground, we knew that it was coming and we knew we had a big challenge. The original Cape and Open High School was built in 1976. We should not have even been talking about replacement. It should have lasted 50 years. It didn't. It didn't make it to 96, okay? It was falling apart literally after 20 years. We knew we needed to replace the high school, and we gave ourselves ample time to go through a planning process. What do we need? What do we need this building to actually do? How many students are it going to house, or will it house? What will the educational programs be? For example, if you have vocational programs, your construction is going to be a lot different than if you have just regular programs, okay? If you're a college prep program, it's a lot cheaper to build than a vocational high school, for example. You get architects involved, and there's a pot of money that sits in Dover, and it changes depending upon how many people are in this stage of the capital projects process. But you can get this planning money, quote unquote. So you get $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 in planning money, and for 2 or 3 years you use that money to bring architects in, and engineers in, and education specialists. And you are quietly, not because you're hiding it, but because you don't know any answers yet. You're still figuring it all out. So you don't want to be standing there saying, well, we're going to build this school, it's going to look like this. We're not there yet. We're not at architectural renderings. We're at conceptual design. What do we need? What do we need? So you go through that, you figure out what you need, and then you get engineers and architects to start to eventually create some renderings for you. And then at that point, about 2 years after you start, then you start bringing the board into it as far as this is what we think we need, this is what we feel would be good for the community. What do you think, Mr. and Mrs. Representative of the community that was elected by the community? What do you think? They give us feedback. Usually they make a lot of significant changes. At that point, we then feel like we've got a package together so we know what we want and we have a fairly good idea as to how much it will cost. Now the state has formulas for what they will fund. They have square footage formulas based on whether you're an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school. It is very much a science, not an art. So you go through all their formulas and you got all that ready. When the board approves it, all they're doing is giving you permission to go to the next step. The next step is to go up to the Department of Ed and ask the facilities experts up there to bless the project and send it forward for approval from the State Board of Education. They will look at what you plan to build. They will look at things like how old the building is, and if there is funding available, and if you are a higher priority than the other people who are in line, and there's always more people outside the pipeline waiting to get in, and there's money to fit in, they will say yes. If they say yes, they will issue a formal contract with you called a Certificate of Need, a CN. Remember this, right? A CN it's literally a contract. It's fascinating. That CN will take all the work you did, with which, if you were smart, fit all the Department of Education criteria and regulations, and they will then give you a contract that says, yes, you can build it. And when you do, we hope they come, right? Because it's not a guarantee. You could build a new school and your enrollment estimates could have been off. I built the first 2 schools I ever helped build. They opened and they were totally over capacity the day they opened. It was very embarrassing. I learned a real good lesson from that. okay? But after you get the Department of Ed to approve it, two wonderful things happen. When they sign the Certificate of Necessity, the CN, you have a contract that says two things. Number one, you can go to the taxpayers, and if you can convince them to give property taxes for the local share, then you can in fact build it. That's the first thing. Number two, they guarantee you a certain percentage of it that they will fund out of state money, out of money that we're going to see in this capital projects fund. Once the state says yes, depending on how poor or rich your district is, you will get a certain percentage. If you are a district with a high property tax base, like a Cape and Lopin or an Indian River School District or a Sussex Tech, the state will fund 60%. And you have to get the other 40 by going to a referendum and getting taxpayers to approve us increasing their taxes to pay for the 40% funded over 20 years at prevailing interest rates. If you are a poor property tax district like Laurel, okay, if you're down there, you're going to probably get close to 80%, if not 80% from the state, and taxpayers will have to come up with 20%. Which sounds sweet, but they have no tax base, so the average taxpayer in a lake is actually going to pay more. A Lake Forest or a Laurel, they actually will pay more out of pocket than the rich districts, despite what the percentages tell you. Once you go to referendum and the taxpayers say, yeah, we'll pay our share, it is a done deal. It is a done deal. You are rocking and rolling now. The only thing that can delay you is the availability of cash on the state side. Because the state only has the authority to bond so much money a given year. They can only, by law, go into debt 5% of net revenues. So whatever their budget, this isn't the budget, this is the capital, whatever the state budget says the estimated revenues are, you can only borrow up to 5%. So there's a limit on debt. And if there's a whole lot of people who pass referendums and are ready to build schools, the state has to then say, we can't afford to give you all the funding this year. Some of you are going to have to wait. If you have to wait, there's this monster called escalation. The costs are going to go up 5–10% for every year you wait. It is a brutal thing. It will destroy all your plans and definitely your happiness.
Was that a cumulative figure? 5% every year?
Absolutely, and it is cumulative. So if it was a $10 million project, it's not a $10 million project the second year, you delay, and then it's going to be multiplied times the multiplier the next year. So I mean, you just don't want to go there. It's not anything. The rule of thumb, Nick, is they will fund you 10% the first year, maybe 20, and 10 or 20% the off year, and in the middle you'll get the balance. So what would that be? Maybe 10, 80, 10 is a very common. I'm trying to remember what we're doing at Laurel. I think Laurel has 20, 20, 60. Yeah, 20, 20, 60 is what Laurel has. So you get a 3-year funding. The first year you give you 20, because not a lot of brick and mortar that first year. Second year, big stuff going on. You're seeing it come up off the ground, 60% of the funding. Last year, it's already up. You're basically doing all the interior stuff, you know, and the what they call FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. You know, the balance of it is spent. In lean years where too many people are trying to get into the pipeline, they'll go, instead of 3-year funding, they'll go 5. That will ruin your day, man. That will really ruin your day. They take that out 5 years, you're going to pay a lot more for that school. The same thing, maybe less, you're going to pay a lot more for it. Now, the whole process, you're the accountant doing this. You're the accountant doing this. Man, you had better be involved in every part of that process. You're thinking, well, I'm an accountant, I'm a bean counter, I don't do that. No, you have to. You have to. You have to guide the process. You have to make sure that money is always in the front of the discussion, because otherwise the district will go bankrupt. Because a $70 million project will do anybody in if it's not done right. So anyway, the taxpayers approve it, first year funding coming down the pipe, and here's how it works. All the money, the state and local share for the first year, will appear in one line, in one appropriation. And that appropriation is only for the first year funding for that project. God help you if you spend that money for something else. God help you. The auditors will tear you up, and you might as well just confess and go to jail, okay? That money is for one thing and one thing only. And a lot of people work hard to get that money, and that's for the first year of the project. Second year, the money will come in, and it'd be the same appropriation, but it'd be a different fiscal year. So here you are. This is my first year of funding for Laurel's high school, middle school complex. I got 20% of the funding, and it's in an appropriation. Let's say it's 51964. But after that, before that, it says FY12. So there it is. Next year, I get the 60%. It'll be the same appropriation, but it'll say FY13. Same appropriation, but different years, so it's really 2 different lines. So the accountant is in reality using a capital projects fund to account for that project. It's one appropriation, it's one fund where we're keeping track of it all. But the bottom line is, to make sure we keep the year straight, we have three separate lines for our 3-year project. Make sense?